I think would be most helpful if we actually know something in depth first. So I
Yes.
can't ask AI to teach me how to teach reading.
It becomes this movement towards checking boxes
Right,
as
right.
opposed to making meaning.
So when kids struggle together, they feel like winners together. Don't worry about the standards. Tell me what you want kids to learn.
Welcome to Toddle's School Leaders Project. I'm your host, Cindy Blackburn, and today I'm speaking with Karin Hess. She's a prolific author, but she's probably most known for her book, Rigor by Design. This was such a lovely conversation because it feels like so many pieces and parts come together to make sense. Things like competency-based education, the concept of rigor, and really designing learning that's engaging and builds student understanding. I loved speaking with Karin about the 5 teacher moves that really help us to design learning that's intentional and rigorous for students, not just by accident, but truly by design. Let's jump in. Welcome to Toddle's School Leaders Project. I'm your host, Cindy Blackburn, and today I'm speaking with Karin Hess. She's a prolific author, but she's probably most known for her book, Rigor by Design. This was such a lovely conversation because it feels like so many pieces and parts come together to make sense. Things like competency-based education, the concept of rigor, and really designing learning that's engaging and builds student understanding. I loved speaking with Karin about the 5 teacher moves that really help us to design learning that's intentional and rigorous for students, not just by accident, but truly by design. Let's jump in. Today's episode of the podcast is brought to you by Toddle, your all-in-one teaching and learning platform made for teachers and by teachers. If you're curious about planning more intentional and rigorous curriculum, Toddle is a great place to start. It gets your teachers speaking the same language about what success looks like, and our planning and assessment tools are all powered by AI. Check us out at toddleup.com. Now, back to the episode with Karin. Karin Hess, I am so excited to have you here in the School Leaders Project. Thanks so much for joining me.
Thank you. I'm excited to be here.
Yay! I'd love for you to kind of set the stage for the audience and tell us about who you are and the work that you do that you're most passionate about.
Okay, great. Well, how much time do we have? So I'm a former teacher and a former school administrator. I taught in New Jersey. I was an administrator in Vermont, principal, curriculum director, Title I director. And over the years, I became involved with test design through the Center for Assessment in Dover, New Hampshire. And
Oh,
for about 15 years, I learned a lot about assessment that I didn't ever learn as a teacher or as an administrator. We gave state assessments, we got results back, and for about 15 years, I learned a lot about how to design a good assessment. That's how I got involved really with depth of knowledge, content complexity, text complexity, learning progression. So these were all sort of areas that touched on how we teach and how we assess. And so I would
cool.
say my passion and the reason I left the center was so I could work directly with schools, because
Hmm.
over my whole career, I have found that you have the greatest impact if you can get into the school, or if I can support school leaders, instructional coaches who are in the schools. I often say there's no way I'm going to get into every school, but a lot of my writing is designed to support school leaders and teachers. So, Rigor by Design came out in 2023, and then Elevating Competency Based Learning in a PLC at Work came out in 2024, and then Applying Depth of Knowledge and Cognitive Rigor came out this year. So, yeah, I've been busy.
Oh my gosh, a book in a year? Do you sleep?
No, well, it's funny. When I'm working on a book, I'm like totally immersed in it, and I don't sleep. I wake up in the middle of the night and say, that would go in chapter 3.
Okay.
But there's a lot of overlap in the writing that I do. The audience may shift a little bit. The competency based books I've done are really saying, well, what does depth of knowledge and rigor look like in a competency based system? Rigor by Design, I will say, is my best selling book. And it's just, I think, because it's filled with practical strategies. And that's why it's become so popular.
That makes sense. I've been on a competency kick this year and we've really loved learning about it. I come from an IB background and I find the parallels there are so similar. And really, I think that's what all curriculum is about at the end of the day, right? Is how do we design learning experiences that are challenging and personalized and meaningful? And it seems like that's kind of the through line of the work that you do.
Yeah, I think theoretically, most educators will say, well, I think that's what we do. But it's tricky because we're so focused on standards, which are smaller pieces. So a competency is a bigger chunk of learning, a large grained learning target, and the standards support that learning. And if you're so focused on the smaller parts, sometimes you can't, it's seeing the forest through the trees. Um, but so the competency based work, I always say, don't worry about the standards. Tell me what you want kids to learn by the end of the unit of study. Now let's look at what standards support that learning, which is a little bit different way to think about it. And then it makes sense.
That's a gorgeous way of explaining it. And it parallels that idea of understandings or understanding by design.
Mm-hmm.
So again, a similar framework,
Yep.
but that
Yep.
I think that that is the biggest missing piece, especially in public schools. Like you said, with standards, it becomes this movement towards checking boxes
Right.
as
Right.
opposed to making meaning.
Yeah. And a lot of the competencies work started out like that. They were checking boxes. And then a lot of school leaders were saying, wait a minute, this can't be just another checklist. It's got to be about depth and breadth. And so I talk a lot about transferring the learning from the standards to a new situation, a problem solving task, a performance assessment. That's really the distinguishing factor. And then you really have to think about depth of knowledge because most of our standards don't go deep until you put them together, till you bundle them together. And then now you're in a deeper situation. Then you have to figure out how do all kids find success with this.
That makes sense. That's really cool. Thank you for that clarity on the definition of competency. I wonder, could you also give kind of a similar overview for the concept of rigor? Maybe misconceptions that come up often, or even just a working definition for that?
Sure. Well, I always use the phrase cognitive rigor because I think one of the big misconceptions, I have a slide that says if you looked up the word rigor, it would say hard, rigid, strict, rigor mortis.
Yeah.
But cognitive rigor is how your brain can see things from different perspectives. So I talk about three aspects. It's about the depth of the engagement with the content. That's depth of knowledge. It's about the content itself and what you're doing with that content. So you've got two types of complexity. And then it's about the scope of the activity. So a small scope would be turn and talk to your partner and paraphrase what that person just said. That's a very short scope. Or we're going to work on a project. That's a broader scope. So the longer it takes usually to delve into something complex, like the content, and do a lot of things with that content, analyze it, um, create something new from it, that bundle of those three pieces is what cognitive rigor really is. It's the brain's ability to see things from different perspectives, not memorize one perspective.
Mm. So is transfer really the key piece there?
Transfer is the key piece. And people use the word I've heard it, I think, the first time from Grant Wiggins and then later Grant and Jay. But I talk about two different kinds of transfer. Near transfer is I'll teach you the skill, then I want you to replicate the skill. That's near transfer. It's close to how I taught you. Far transfer is take that learning now and do something with it that I haven't taught you how to do. And I like the analogy, and I often quote Grant Wiggins because I learned so much from him over the years. But
Such a beautiful thinker.
he said, coming to school is like being on a team. You get to come to practice every day and do the drills. That's near transfer. But he says far transfer is playing the game. That's when you take
Right.
those skills and you put it together. Every time you play a new game, it's new situations, and you have to say, okay, I know how to hit the ball, I know how to catch the ball, but how am I going to do it now? And so teachers have to learn how to design some of those far transfer types of activities for kids. And I call that scrimmaging so that they're ready for the game.
So cool. That's such a beautiful analogy.
Yeah, I can't come up with a better one, so I'll keep repeating his.
Well, and what's so cool about this is so many of these concepts are things like, we're talking about work it's been talked about since right as 80s beforehand. But I feel like especially now, and I wonder if you're seeing this too, that like as AI is becoming more prominent, it's like the need for these things, the need to build rigor and depth of understanding and transfer is really being highlighted.
Yeah. And I think my biggest worry is that if we just go to AI and ask AI what it is when we don't know, that promotes a lot of misconceptions because there's a lot of bad information out there. I recently was presenting at a conference, and there was a description of my presentation, and the assistant who was putting the program together said, well, I went on AI and asked them to revise this, and this is what they wrote. She sent it to me, and I said, that's not really what I'm going to do. I said, I like my revisions better. Let's just keep what I know. And I think sometimes I think would be most helpful if we actually know something in depth first. So I
Yes.
can't ask AI to teach me how to teach reading if I don't know how reading happens in the brain. And if I'm just relying on something telling me how to do it, I don't know if I'm doing it right or wrong or if I'm going to be successful. So this is not an AI book. It's these are things that the cognitive science says should work. And I spend a lot of time considering what activities to put in a book so that it illustrates it beautifully. And it's not complex. Like a lot of things are theoretical. Yeah, I want my kids to think. But then you look at the kinds of questions they might be asking in a classroom and they're not asking kids to think. So
Right.
give me a good model for a good question. Give me a good model for how to probe to get what I want out of the kids. That's what I try to focus my work on because those are the master teachers. The master teachers might use AI to come up with, I don't know, something, resources or whatever, but they know how to teach already. And I think we need to remind ourselves of that. It's not a silver bullet.
Well, and I love what you just said. Like, this is not an AI book, but in my heart, it is.
Okay.
Because if we're thinking about assessment, quality assessment, that's learning worth doing,
Mm-hmm.
like that's the antidote. Like, all the teachers are asking, how do I design an assessment that kids won't use AI to cheat?
Yep.
It's like you make it rigorous. You make it a space where thinking is joyous and exciting work,
Right.
not just fill in the blank or just default to an essay.
Yeah. And the best assessment is a metacognitive assessment because AI doesn't know how you made your decisions, what you learned most, what you struggled with. So I think we underestimate asking kids to use a reflective opportunity to tell us what they learned, not just ask them questions to answer.
Gorgeous. I'm so curious, Karen, because you've worked in a lot of schools, and this is a topic that you're clearly passionate about. And I wonder what misconceptions come up consistently, especially in the space of rigor, in the space of understanding, in the space of competencies that you kind of see again and
Sure,
again.
sure. As a matter of fact, I started to hear the same kind of questions over and over again when I started to do this work. So I actually built them into my presentations and I built them into my books. And I have like 7 of them that are big. I won't go through all of them in detail, but the first one is always, can all kids really do this? Um, the the pre-K2 teachers will say, well, our kids are just at the foundational level. I don't think they can do this. And then the special ed teachers might say, well, I don't know how our kids can do this. And we have a high school and middle school teacher saying, well, there's kids reading below grade level. I don't know how they could possibly do this. And so part of my work is to say you can't do rigor without strategic scaffolding. So you can't ride a mountain bike up a mountain trail if I don't give you support to learn how to do that and practice how to do something really challenging. We're not just going to ride with the training wheels the whole time. So that's the first big one. Um, Other ones are if you don't learn quickly, that's what rigor is. You learn it fast, or you can do more. You can read more books in a short amount of time. It's not more. Often kids are rewarded when they finish early. Oh, you can do another one, read another one, do another worksheet. I probably was guilty of doing some of that stuff when I first started teaching, keeping kids busy as opposed to keeping them thinking. Another one is the idea of a taxonomy, because everybody knows Bloom's taxonomy. I use Bloom's taxonomy as a teacher. I planned lessons, I did workshops and talked about Bloom's taxonomy. But Bloom's taxonomy kind of implies that you start at one place and you end at some high place. And and that's not really research based, by the way. It's a model. And what learning really does is it kind of cycles back and it says, oh, there's a new problem. I have to go back and get some new information. So I'm going back to some basics and then I'm building on it. So it's not a taxonomy. And when administrators say, our goal is to be at DOK 4 most of the time, that's not practical. It's not possible.
Right.
It's like, we're going to write a research paper every day this year. It's like, no, we're not. We're going to learn about new topics.
Be synthesizing something.
Yeah, right. First you have to learn the something before you can do something with the something.
Yeah.
And then let's see. I was thinking there might be one more. So it's not a taxonomy, and verbs aren't the indicator. So Bloom's taxonomy kind of says, well, there are verbs at each level, but I can take a verb, and I think in Rigor by Design, I use the word draw. Draw a circle. Okay, that recalls some recall of what a circle looks like, and it's pretty simplistic. But if I say draw a line of best fit on a scatter plot, well, now I have to plot points. I have to know what a best fit line is, and I have to understand the concept behind it. And maybe I move from there to draw a plan for a room design or a building or a art project. So now we're still drawing, but every time I use a different example, I change the content. The verb is staying the same. The content is changing to the point of you have to use a lot of verbs. The deeper you go in your understanding, the more verbs you have to use. I have to analyze something and evaluate pros and cons of it and make a decision about that and then do some planning. Maybe I have to try it out and get some feedback and go back and revise my thinking. So, and that stupid verb wheel, I call it the wheel of misfortune. The DOK wheel of misfortune, because it just implies pick a verb and suddenly kids are thinking.
It's transformed.
It's right. Like the verb analyze. People think if they just throw the word analyze into a lesson plan. I said, well, what are your kids actually doing when they analyze? Because I can see analysis at I call it analysis light, at a pretty low level, but a deeper level analysis is like having discussion, reading about different perspectives, maybe doing a role play to show those perspectives. That's a different level of analysis. So one message I would say to school leaders and instructional coaches is don't focus on the verbs in the standards, because the verb itself, the verb is part of the thing I have to teach you how to do. I have to teach you how to analyze, and I have to teach you about the Civil War. Now that's two. I have to teach you how the doing part and the content part. And then what I do is create an expectation of what are you going to do with those things? How are you going to analyze the content of the Civil War?
I think what I'm hearing there, Karin, is that it's such a catch-22, because I think as educators and especially as leaders, like curricular leaders, you're almost looking for the silver bullet,
Yes.
This thing that you can just give teachers that's going to make it all click together. But the problem is that if you're just using, it's like a scaffold, but without having a deeper understanding behind it, it just kind of gets lost in translation somewhere.
One of the reasons I wrote the book that just came out, the Applying Depth of Knowledge book, was I was asked by the publisher, they said, so many people talk about depth of knowledge and there's so many misconceptions. Could you take people back to the very beginning? Because so many people have a misconception and then they find a simple way to employ it. And
Yeah.
it kind of blows up the whole concept. And so I started out there way back at the beginning, like, how did I create this matrix? What are those depth of knowledge levels? What are the misconceptions? And I think if you're going to simplify, it has to still be at the essence of the meaning. And here's an example. So I got an email a couple of weeks ago from an English teacher, and he said, my principal, and this is in New York City, where they really like the rigor matrix. So my principal said, we're going to use the rigor matrix. And she handed it out, and it was the matrix with a diagonal line drawn on it. And he said, we're going to start up at the top and we're going to end down at the bottom. He said, I've never seen anything you've written with a diagonal line.
Yeah.
Now, I think what the administrator was doing was like, I'm going to simplify this and just say, we've got to take that diagonal line and just like plan a lesson or a series of lessons like that. And I said, there is no diagonal line. It's not linear. And he said, because it seems like that diagonal line skips a lot of stuff, like understanding,
Yeah.
conceptual understanding. It kind of just skips over it and goes to creative. And creative might be one example of creating a product or a presentation, but it's not the only way you show deep understanding.
Mm.
So I think there are a lot of ways to simplify it, but keep the essence. One of the things I'm kind of proud of that I did in the Applying Depth of Knowledge book, I thought, what's a real visual way? I talk a lot about sketchnoting. Sketchnoting is when you have your students take notes using color, lines, pictures that'll be meaningful for them.
Right.
And I always, when I'm writing a book, I get feedback. I send out chapters and I say, what do you think? And somebody wrote back and said, you ought to do sketch notes of what depth of knowledge is. So I thought, okay. So depth of knowledge 1, take different colored markers and just put dots on the page. Those are pieces of information that are not connected. That's depth of knowledge 1. And if you're just asking kids to answer a question, you're asking them to focus on the blue dot or the yellow dot or the red dot. Now we move to depth of knowledge 2, and suddenly we want you to know more about the blue dot. So now we're going to draw an arrow from the blue dot to the yellow dot, from the blue dot to the red dot. We're going to say, how does this relate to that? How does this relate to that? And now that blue dot starts to get bigger. So if you kind of think of it as like animating, because I'm going to know more about that blue dot than just how to spell the word or how to define the word. I'm going to start to understand it in a conceptual way. I'm going to compare it, contrast it. I'm going to sequence it with other things. Now we get to DOK 3, and now I want you to know more about the red dot and the yellow dot and the blue dot, and I want to see arrows connect in all different directions because I want you to build a schema around that concept. Now you're starting to problem solve, think critically. Up to this point, you've really said this is what it is. Now you're saying, here's how they relate. Here's some new ideas, some new insights I have. And then at DOK 4, I start to see the dots merging. So imagine the blue dot and the yellow dot start to overlap and you have green. That's a new insight. And if we could simplify things in a way that's conceptually meaningful, then we could say, when are you asking kids to put ideas together and truly say, wow, I never thought of it that way before.
Cool.
This is a new investigation I could do in science. This is a new perspective I hadn't thought of before. So simplify is good if it's true to the concept, the essence of it.
Well, if it helps you understand it.
Right.
Not just if it helps you skip over the hard thinking to just do something.
Yeah. And it should apply in all cases. We should be able to do that in art. We should be able to do that in math. We should be able, if we say, well, now it's different. Every content domain has its own schema, but you can put ideas together and grow your understanding no matter what your age or what your content area is.
Beautiful. I could imagine that entire animation as we talk to see if my team can make it for the reel for this episode.
Well, I'll send you the visual of it, but I haven't really created an animation. I would love an animation of it.
Okay, I'll see if we can do it. That would be fun to have. I'm curious though, Karen, because obviously this is a framework, the Matrix, you've thought of a lot and you've rolled out in schools.
Mhm.
So if I'm an administrator who loves your work and is thinking about bringing it into my school, what do you suggest rather than just giving that, the diagram with the line through it? What's a more approachable or more thoughtful starting point for introducing the Matrix?
Right. So I think that's an excellent question because a lot of this stuff is on the internet and people can download it. And I'm guilty of that too. I download something and say, oh, I could use this. And then I kind of make up a way I could use it. But I always start my workshop saying, how do you know when kids are thinking deeply?
Mm.
And we talk about what they would see and what they would hear kids doing. And it really comes down to kids are making connections. They're raising new questions. They're solving problems. So if we start to think about what are the things that kids are doing, then how could we illustrate that to show a deepening of understanding? And that's really how I got started with the matrix. I found things that said Bloom's taxonomy matches up with depth of knowledge. And this is what it might look like. And I had teachers in the early years saying to me, Karin, I think they're the same thing. And I knew they weren't the same thing. So I had to get back into Bloom's taxonomy and read more about it. And Bloom's taxonomy talks about the type of thinking you're using. You are analyzing, you're evaluating, you're creating, you're remembering. It's a type of thinking, but it's pretty much void of content. And we know
Mm.
that analyzing a math problem, you're not doing the same mental process as you are when you're analyzing a piece of literature. So cognitive science says in our brains, and I do a lot of this in the Rigor by Design book, in our brains, we're developing schemas for how is science put together? How is math put together? How is reading and writing put together? Because when you have mental schemas, you can learn faster. New information comes in and you have a place to file it. If there is no schema, you don't, it's like out there floating, like the red dot and the green dot. They're not connected to anything. And so if we start with the conceptual idea of what does it look like when kids are thinking deeply, and then how do they get there? How do they get
What do
there?
they need?
Yeah,
What tools do they need to
right.
get there? Yeah.
If they come to school and they don't have background knowledge, we have to build the background knowledge. If they have background knowledge, and we know some kids do and some kids don't on any given day, then we have to say, how are they going to use that background knowledge? Are we
Mm.
going to stop at just being able to replicate near transfer, or are we going to say, now you've got these skills, you're going to design your own game. You've learned how to dribble and pass and shoot the ball, but you're going to create your own new game to use that. You're going to create rules for your new game. So you know what rules are for this game. Change the rules, make it interesting, make it fun. Um, so if you start that way, then I think the matrix makes sense. And over the years, I've created the domain specific examples just to remind people that in the fine arts, it doesn't look the same as it does in ELA or math. And the examples help the art teacher or the math teacher or the science teacher to look at their own lesson planning and say, what am I asking my students to do? Are we stuck in definition land? Are we stuck in just, I'll give you harder problems and you'll just calculate? Because there are math practices about precision, but there are math practices also about analyzing the reasoning of others. So we look at a
Yes.
problem that's solved incorrectly and say, that doesn't make sense, and here's why it doesn't make sense. And I can prove it. I can prove it. I can develop a mathematical argument.
I guess what I hear in that is just getting really, really crystal clear of what you're assessing.
Mm-hmm.
Like, what does success look like in my
Right.
classroom?
Right.
And that for you, the more successful metrics aren't the what vocabulary words and what like hard skills are we learning? Those are a piece of the puzzle,
Sure.
but more being able to zoom out and zoom up into, let's imagine a year from now, 5 years from now,
Mhm.
10 years from now, if we were really successful, what would kids
Yeah.
take away?
Yeah. Like what are we preparing kids to do? We shouldn't be preparing them. One of my sons, all through high school, he said, Mom, every time I ask my math teachers, why do I have to learn this? They say, so you can take the next math course. But he said they didn't really explain how it was going to be used. And it wasn't until he was in an engineering program, he said, now I see how it all fits together. But nobody really helped me to see the long-term goal of how mathematics could be used in the world of engineering.
And what a missed opportunity that is.
Yeah, yeah. Because a lot of kids ask that question all the time. Why are we doing this? That's about
Right.
engagement. We have to engage kids first on the personal level
Mm.
before we engage
Yes,
them
who are you? What
on
do
the
you want?
cognitive level. I don't care about this topic, so I'm not going to think about it. Make me care about it. Oh, it was an article in the newspaper, it was something on the news, it was something we
Mm.
should be caring about. Now let's try to solve that problem. That's different. And I'm now
Well,
invested in it as a learner.
I totally agree with you. As a teacher, are there practical ways to do that? Like, is it student interviews, or what are the ways that you really ground learning in that meaning
Yeah.
making?
So one of the things I did in Rigor by Design is I came up with 5 research-based teacher moves.
Yeah.
And to help people remember them, I did A, B, C, D, E. A, ask probing questions of increasing complexity. So that means don't just ask a question. So if you go in and you do an observation, you're saying, did you use a higher order thinking question? Well, I've heard higher order thinking questions asked and they fall flat, or one student can answer it, or the teacher answers it because nobody answers it. Great question, and now I'll answer it for everyone. So, how do you keep probing so you get where you want kids to be? That's that idea of taking kids further. It's our job to do that. So, that's the A. B is build schemas in every content area. And
Smart.
there are practical ways to do that. But how do I help kids build that mental map? One of the reasons we should use graphic organizers in a strategic way is to help kids see the connections. One reason we use sketchnoting is so that kids can draw little pictures to help them remember the connections, to make the connections. See,
Mm.
now we're at a point where, okay, we have kids thinking and we're making connections. C is consider strategic scaffolding. Because at this point, everybody's not going to be able to do it. And you can't, I have to support you if I want you to go further. So, strategic scaffolding is know why you're scaffolding. And I talk about 3 big chunks of scaffolding. And I also talk about the fact that scaffolding isn't differentiation. It's not the same thing. A lot of people will sit in a workshop with me and say, what? I never knew that. I've always heard that they're the same. No, they're complementary. Scaffolding is I'm going to give you steps to get everyone to the top of the ladder. So I want everybody to write the essay. I want everybody to be successful at problem solving. So I'm going to break that down and I'm going to say, what do you need? Maybe you need to develop your language skills, a scaffold for language development. Maybe because it's a complex test with a lot of moving parts, you can't keep track of it all. You need executive functioning support. So maybe I need to break that task down into parts and have checkpoints along the way. So I know that you're not off the rails somewhere in a ditch. And the third is how do I scaffold so you can go deeper? You're at this level. What can I do to bring you to another level and another level? And I actually put together like a little graphic where it shows you could do scaffolding at every DOK level. If you're at DOK
Mm-hmm.
1, a sentence frame might help you to put a sentence together. That's very different from a scaffolding strategy called a word splash, where I give you a bunch of words and you put them together in some way to show what you know. So they're both scaffolding because they've got
Mm.
key ideas, but one is a little bit more complex and it's kind of higher up on the ladder. So we have to know where kids are and we have to know how to get them just to that next level. and then just to that next level after that.
Your concept of scaffolding reminds me a lot of universal design for learning.
Yep, yep. It's very much, yeah, yeah. And all kids don't need the same scaffolding.
Exactly. Firm goals, flexible means.
Right, right. So, which kind of takes me back to the idea of you want actionable strategies. You were saying how to get started. Actionable, an actionable assessment. Just about everything we do is a formative assessment in a classroom, really. And an actionable assessment is I'm going to uncover your thinking. I'm going to do something that uncovers your thinking. I don't care what you memorized. I had my kids memorize stuff. I memorize stuff. We were just talking the other day. I memorized that the Magna Carta was signed in 1215. I did not know why that was important, but I got it right on the
Right.
test in high school. And we were talking about, we were watching a documentary, and the person I was watching, I said, "Did you know the Magna Carta was kind of like the first piece of paper that said this is what a democracy is?" I said, "Yeah, now I know," but I didn't know what it was. So uncover the thinking. Ask a question that uncovers kids' thinking. And then the second part is now that I know what you're thinking, I know how close you are to the learning target.
Right.
And then I can either give you actionable feedback, I can suggest what would be helpful, or I can ask you to use the feedback to
To take the next
take the
step.
next step. So if we thought about all the strategies we use in the classroom, we say, how does this uncover thinking? Well, it doesn't. It uncovers memorization. Okay. I mean, you can ask those questions, but every assessment, every little assessment, every time you put kids together in a group to talk, uncover their thinking in some way, because that's when you know what reasoning they're using, what support they're using for their reasoning. That's the only way you're going to know. You have to ask them. For many years, I taught math, and I'd take those papers home and I'd look at the problem because I always said, "Show your work," and I'd be like, what was the kid thinking? See, now I know you have to ask the students to say, "Why did you solve it this way? How do you know your answer is reasonable? Does it make sense? Prove it to me." That's,
Show me.
yeah, yeah. Tell me why this equation or this strategy helped you solve the problem.
So we've got three of your moves here. So the ask probing questions, building schema, and the C is about creating scaffolding. I know there are two more, but I'm curious, do these happen sequentially? Like, do I first work on questioning and then I move into building schema, or are they all kind of happening simultaneously?
They're kind of interrelated, but most schools will say, we need a starting point. So I always talk about asking probing questions because those questions can build schema. Those questions can help uncover what kids need in terms of scaffolding. Those questions will help you. D is design complex tasks. They'll help you to design better complex tasks because you'll know how to write a good prompt for a performance task. And then the E is engage kids in metacognition. So they also help you to ask metacognitive questions. So if I had to do a visual of this, probably asking probing questions would be a good center of the wheel that sort of pushes all the rest out. A lot of schools think they might be ready for designing complex tasks, but I think they have to understand the probing questions and the scaffolding first.
Those are kind of the foundational skills,
Yeah,
it sounds like.
yeah,
Getting curious about what your kids know and how that relates to your learning targets.
right.
And then again, becoming curious designers of the scaffold and supports that it will
Yeah.
take to kind of
Because
get them
then it's like,
this.
wow, they're here. Now what? Now what's next? Now it's the design of complex tasks and have kids reflect on what their learning is. In other words, don't just assess the final product, assess the learning process.
So I might just do one final reflection question and then we could kind of cap it there.
Okay.
All right. So, Karen, to me, there's just kind of this through line of productive struggle that to me in schools where this work is really meaningfully being done, we see teachers who are productively struggling, and that kind of culture filters into the classroom where we see students going through that same process. So, as school leaders, how do we make the space for this vulnerability and this kind of shift in work?
It's an important question because people want people work hard. They want to get it right. They want to get it fast. We don't want kids to suffer, so we overly scaffold sometimes and do all the thinking for them. Productive struggle is when real learning occurs. And if we started there and said, if I really have to struggle a little bit and then I have an aha, it's going to stick with me. So, what's going to provide that opportunity? For teachers, I think it's when teachers are saying, and when I was a principal, why is it our kids are having so much trouble with math problem solving? Let's look at it together. So, productive struggle is supported by group problem solving, PLCs, if you will. And it's teachers, all the first grade teachers, looking at samples of student work and saying, wow, how did you get kids to do that? My kids are doing this. In a classroom, it's the same idea. We want to create opportunities to step back and let kids scrimmage a little bit. Let them mess around with the content. Let them do it not on their own, but with other kids. Because we know from the research that when the kids who have a complex task to work on together can learn faster, can go more deeply into the content than they could on their own. And they will learn better from a peer because peers talk their language.
Right.
I mean, I can remember in a classroom trying to teach a concept, and then some student would explain it, and another student would say, oh, now I get it. And I think I should have asked you 3 days ago to explain that, because I've been explaining it in a way that it wasn't understandable for every student. So when kids struggle together, they feel like winners together. Kids don't say, I won the game. They say, we won the game. And when kids work together and are successful, even though they might be at different ability levels, they all feel like winners. They say, I can do this. I've done this before. I did it with other people. I identify with successful kids. So kids who are always expected to do everything on their own are never going to identify with other kids. They're going to be on their own, sink or swim. And so I think the idea of a productive struggle is you step back and you act like a coach watching a scrimmage. You let kids struggle a little bit and you say, okay, let's take a look at what just happened. Let's roll the videotape, right?
Yeah.
Let's see what we could do differently together. And there's power in that. There's a lot of power in that.
Well, and that sounds to me, it's like curiosity over competition.
Yeah.
And that I think somewhere in the standardized testing era, we lost that
Mm-hmm.
learning was a collaborative endeavor. And it became scary. Like if my salary as a teacher is going to be connected to this test score,
Yeah.
I want to be the best.
Yeah.
Right. So I think it's almost like kind of this unclenching and yeah, collaborative spirit that really
It's building a system with a common understanding and common goals. And you can't get there with standardized tests. Standardized tests are a piece of information, but boy, when every teacher is kind of speaking the same language and they're all on the same page, you have a systemic change as opposed to everybody's doing something differently. They might all be good things, but they're not a system. So it's not working like a system.
right. Oh, and I think that's where the not by chance piece comes in.
Yeah.
That it's not that hodgepodge. It's all of us working that power of collective
Yeah.
teacher efficacy from Hattie's research coming back.
Absolutely. I know why I did it. I know what to expect from it, and I know how to look at the results and make adjustments.
Beautiful. Well, Karen, I just really love your work and I love
Oh, thank you.
all how you're putting those pieces together in a really cool way.
Thank you. Thank you so much. This has been really fun.
Yay, for me too.